university is very important. So I will just introduce our table. And it's an immense pleasure to welcome you to Unicamp at the Festival of Ideas, Power and Prosperity in Multipolar World. My name is Iago Montalvão. I am former president of the National Union of Students, and now I am master degree at Instituto de Economia of Unicamp, and also researcher of the Transforma Unicamp. The Transforma Unicamp, it's a group of students, researchers, and teachers that seeks to discuss important themes to our society from a critical perspective and a left perspective. We believe that the role of the university is not constrained by your own walls, but the knowledge that we construct here needs to serve to build a better society. At this table, we'll talk about Palestine, imperialism, and the future of the international law. We apologize for some exchanges in the table, in the schedule, but we are here to present our guests that we are very thankful that you are here. I have to say that it's a privilege to be sitting here side by side with you, and we are very thankful for your presence. First, I'd like to introduce Kavita Naidu, that's an international human rights lawyer and feminist climate activist from the Progressive International in Pacific. Thank you. I'd like to introduce to Paul Worgan, from the Secretariat, Coordinator of the Progressive International. Thank you. I'd like to introduce to Ismat Raza, the president, founder of the Democrat Woman, the Friend of Democrat Woman. Thank you to be here. And I'd like to introduce to Tiago Amparo, that it's a lawyer and professor from the International Law and Human Rights at Getúlio Vargas Foundation, São Paulo Law School. Thank you also to be here. Well, we'll begin our discussion. We'll have like 10 minutes from each presentation in the first round. Yes, we can. This is a extremely. Excuse me, I will sit. This is an extremely important theme because, as you know, we are seeing now a massacre and a genocide that is happening in Palestine. The Palestinians have been under violent and disproportionate attacks from Israel for more than 200 days. And despite the protests around the world, several manifestations and several manifestations by multilateral entities, even the Hajj Court, the bloodshed attacks haven't stopped. So to talk about this very important theme, I give the floor to our first speaker, Ismat Raza. Thank you again.
Salam, everyone. First of all, I thank PI and Unicamp for organizing this session and allowing me to speak on the issue of Palestine, resistance against imperialism, a subject close to the Women Democratic Front's heart. To begin with, I narrate lines of Habib Jaleb, a revolutionary poet from Pakistan. Zulm rahe aur amn bhi ho, zulm rahe aur amn bhi ho, kya mumkin hai tum hi kaho. Let there be atrociousness and yet there will be peace. Is that possible? You tell it yourself. On Palestine and imperialism, first of all, on behalf of the Women Democratic Front, I present a red salute to our Palestinian sisters and brothers in struggle, the Palestine masses and resistant forces, and the progressives around the world for fearlessly fighting the most ferocious and merciless imperialist war machinery in the human history. We offer this statement first and foremost to the Palestinian people whose struggle against colonialism and imperialism continue to inspire us every day. Generation after generation, they fall, and time after time, they rise with their wounded soul and brutalized bodies. We recognize the Palestinian liberation struggle as at the heart of the Third World anti-imperialist struggle and extend our deepest solidarity to the people fighting against Israel's colonial expansionism. We oppose imperialist wars everywhere, anywhere, including the Second Cold War that is once again converting Palestine, Pakistan, and Afghanistan into global war theaters. Our solidarity with the Palestinian cause has deep roots in the Third World internationalism and anti imperialism. The Palestine liberation is an anti colonial struggle, and we recognize it as such. We also recognize that the Zionist forces of Israel cannot continue their violence without the support of imperialist forces, especially the Anglo Saxon Empire and its allies. On international law, the case of Gaza once again exposed the imperialist nature of international law. Israel openly violated the Genocide Convention in broad daylight, inflicting death, destruction, and displacement on Palestinian masses. While international law has been ineffective, as always, when confronting imperialism, particularly settler colonialism, for the system was never intended to challenge imperialist wars and the imperialist machinery. In our view, the current international legal order is imperialist. It supports geo-economic expansions, the making of super profits, fueled by the systemic looting of former and new colonies, and sustains the exploitation of workers in the imperialist heartlands. It also supports imperialist war industry. Multilateral institutions historically have been used as scaffoldings to serve imperialism, its structures of domination, and to justify its destruction and genocidal wars. International political and legal spaces such as the UN, the International Court of Justice, and the International Criminal Court have always been hostile spaces for conversations about the historical and structural domination of the Anglo-Saxon Empire. This empire and its biggest imperialist war machinery, NATO, shaped the modern geopolitical and geoeconomic order of the world. The unconditional support that USA and NATO allies have provided in the form of military aid, arms, and technology to the Israeli state over the last few decades is highly condemnable, and so is the criminal silence of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and UN on the ongoing violence against the people of Palestine. The use of veto powers in cases involving war crimes, genocide, mass atrocities, and humanitarian crises is tantamount to barbarism. Political struggle for democratization of the UN, mainly the Security Council, to include permanent members from Africa, Latin America, and Asia, reflecting a more diverse and representative global order, should be on the left's agenda. We firmly believe that a concerted campaign for dismantling NATO must be initiated as well. To conclude, in my view, the 17th and 18th centuries were the centuries of colonization through conventional means and direct physical occupation. The 19th and 20th centuries were the centuries of decolonization, democratic revolutions, socialist revolutions, and counter-revolutions. And the 21st century is seeing proxy wars for recolonization, financial and environmental forms of imperialism, and the use of big tech and artificial intelligence for imperialist expansionism to avoid the meltdown of the Anglo-Saxon Empire and a new balance of global power into a multipolar formation and beyond. As we embark on the 21st century and this new stage of history, the period of traditional socialist and feminist revolutions has concluded. and progressive forces worldwide are seeking new democratic means for revolutions. Socialist movements are achieving electoral victories in several countries in Central and South America. Socialists also emerged victorious in Nepal. Women are leading revolutions in Kurdistan, resisting dictatorship in Iran, and leading national resisting movements in Balochistan, in my part of the world. Pashtuns, I come from the belt of Pashtuns, are fighting against the militarization of our homelands, which has been used as the international battlefield for proxy wars. Palestinians are fighting against the most ferocious nexus of imperialism and Zionism. Afghans are fighting against one of the most oppressive and cruel patriarchies in the world. And mind you, there's a ban on girls' education. All schools have been closed. We know that the only way to defeat an occupation forces in Palestine and across the world is through global solidarity of the left, people's collectives, and transnational conversations. We believe that it is crucial to rebuild solidarities, bringing together the people's struggles from across the world, including the movements of national liberation and women emancipation movements. We call upon the left and resistance forces from a world to join hands to fight capitalism, imperialism, patriarchy, religious extremism, racism, and occupation everywhere and anywhere in the world. We believe that none of us is free until all of us are free. In building the global left and struggle against imperialism, there is no doubt that internationalism is important to defeat imperialism. However, given the hydra-headed nature of imperialism, the Eurocentric nature of internationalism, the emerging multipolar configuration of the global powers, regionalism and national liberation movements and struggles are equally important from our point of view. The darkness of oppression, exploitation, and war has to die. We must build a new politics that is liberatory and forms the basis of our collective liberation and an egalitarian world. Glory to the martyrs, healing to the wounded, and power to the Palestinian masses towards liberation and equality. From river to the sea, from river to the sea, from river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Thank you so much.
I am apologize because I made a mistake. I do not introduce the countries of our guests. I think that is important because we see here important diversity of regions around the world. And so Kavita is from Fiji. The Ismat is from, like she said, from Pakistan. Paulo is based in Berlin now, and Tiago is from Brazil here. Now I can give the floor to Paulo. Okay, Paulo, more 10 minutes. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. Thank you to our hosts for bringing us here for this really important discussion. I want to begin by sharing with you this absolutely stunning figure that I came across last night, really breathtaking number from the United Nations Relief and Works Agency in Palestine, which said that at this point, there are 65,000 people in Rafah. 65,000 people. 6 weeks ago, there were 1.4 million people in Rafah, which means that in the course of 6 weeks, as a result of the relentless bombing, as a result of the sniper attacks, as a result of the massacres against starving people, 1,335,000 people were forced to flee. It's difficult to make sense of the scale of the suffering that the Palestinian people are enduring. Every single day we see photos of parents holding the remains of their children in their hands. We see photos of mothers grieving over their starving daughters. We see photos that are beyond, I think, the capacity of any human being to process at an emotional level. It's extremely difficult. This is not a conflict. This is a war of extermination. It's a siege. It is, maybe provocatively, our generation's liquidation of the Warsaw Ghetto, our generation's Leningrad, and I don't make those comparisons lightly. Now, in the 1930s, Adolf Hitler said that Germany would be the bulwark of the West against Bolshevism. Theodor Herzl, the founding father of Zionism, said that Zionism will be the bulwark of Europe against Asia, the bulwark of civilization against barbarism. And that's language that we've heard again and again and again from the leadership of Israel and the Zionist state. And it's important because it reflects a recognition of their role as a defensive structure for European imperialism, European colonialism. And what that means specifically is that they're an instrument to defend those systems and their capacity to extract surplus value from the rest of the world in the context of a world that was designed by them in a hierarchical fashion where there are some countries that gain and some countries that lose. And that is Israel's function. And it's exercised that function regionally. If we look at the 1960s and the assault, the dismantling of the Ba'athist project in Syria, which was then a radical project with Marxist-Leninist tendencies. If we look at the assault on the Nasserist project in Egypt, what that did is it shifted the balance of trade, which was then starting to favor the Soviet Union, back towards Europe, back towards the United States at conditions which were tremendously unfavorable to those countries. So regionally, it has played the role that European colonialism and imperialism have always played, which is to balkanize, to divide, to de-develop, and to prevent the emergence of a sovereign political and economic project. This is true far beyond the region. Israel supported Rhodesia. Israel supported apartheid South Africa. Israel supported the Somoza dictatorship in Nicaragua. Israel supported the Pinochet coup in Chile and continued to support that government even as it threw communists from helicopters into the ocean. Israel helped coordinate Operation Condor, which, with the help of former Nazis, massacred hundreds of thousands of people on this continent. And here in Brazil, Israel backed the military dictatorship to the hilt. It taught the torturers of the intelligence services. It provided rockets, helicopters, boats, electronics parts, radar systems, communications equipment to the security services. And it didn't care, and this is important, it didn't care that a lot of the regimes it was supporting were fundamentally anti-Semitic in nature. Their goal was colonization. And in 1967, the Prime Minister of Israel held talks, secret talks in Brazil, and later wrote about the outcome of those talks. And I'm going to pull up the direct quote for you because I think it's worth reading. The quote is, "These talks gave me reason to believe that with intensive efforts, thousands, if not tens of thousands of Arab families, especially from the Gaza Strip, could emigrate to Brazil." This was 1967. And we could go on all the way until the present day. But the point of this is that Israel has operated as the tip of the spear of Western, particularly US, colonial and imperial interests. And every single one of these interventions was fundamentally spearheaded by the United States and served to benefit it first and foremost. If we understand Zionism as playing that role in the world system, then as a vanguard force for Western imperialism, then the Palestinian resistance has to be our vanguard. The Palestinian resistance, the sacrifice that it has made, has revealed to us the entire nature, the rotten nature of this imperialist system in a way that's now unsayable in Germany. It's unsayable in the United States. In fact, we have a comrade here who was relieved of her teaching duties some time ago for upholding the Palestinian right to resistance in the United States. One of the members of our council, the Progressive International Council, the former finance minister of Greece, Yanis Varoufakis, has been banned from the country of Germany against the laws of the European Union, including through virtual appearances for his position on Palestine. The entire edifice is crumbling. If you study the great anti-colonial thinkers like Aimé Césaire, like Frantz Fanon, they always warned that fascism is a process by which colonialism is turned back inwards against the colonial metropoles. And that's exactly what we're seeing now. And, President of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, much to his praise, recently implemented the first real embargo against Israel. He put it very bluntly recently. He said, why have large carbon-consuming countries allowed the systematic murder of thousands of children in Gaza? Because Hitler has already entered their homes and they are getting ready to defend their high levels of carbon consumption and reject the exodus that it causes. Very stark condemnation of what's happening. But if the Palestinian resistance has revealed the brokenness of that system and the failure of international institutions and the failure of international law, it's also revealed the capacity of movements to resist in ways that they haven't before, of countries to come together. It's dismantled the ideological, at least, hegemony of the United States in ways that I think it won't be able to recover from. So I think this is a moment of immense terror and a moment of immense hope. And it is so important that as the left, we understand very clearly what the role of Zionism is in the international system and what the role of the Palestinian resistance is. Because there's a very big difference. Wherever we are, many countries are complicit with the genocide. To be able to distinguish between the obligation to go out and protest and the obligation of being in the rear of a battle that is now led from Palestine. And that is where I think we are today. So I'll stop with that. And I'd like to say a few things about international law, but we can leave it for a little bit later as well. Thank you.
I think to Powell, it's very nice to hear from others' perspective about this thing that all of us in the world are very concerned because, like you said here, it's not a war, it's a massacre, and we have to give our solidarity in all of the countries. And so the government had, like Petro, had to do like objective stuff, like cut all the relationships. We here in Brazil are struggling to the Lula government also do that. So, well, I wish to now give the floor to Kavita Naidu, and thank you again to be here. You are very welcome at Brazil and at Unicamp. Thank you.
Thank you. Bula, everyone. So I thought I'd interact a little bit with you while I'm giving my presentation, only because I'd like to get to know you as well. Hands up, how many of you know where Fiji is? Wow. I usually don't get this many hand raises, so this is great. I'm also severely jet lagged, so forgive me if I sound like I'm not connecting the dots very well. I think it's about 1 a.m. where I come from. I live in Australia. It was a long flight. How many of you are law students? Oh, even better. Okay. Right. So maybe then I'll start with where Powell, and Powell, I didn't realize he was such a great historian. Wow, the dates. Amazing. Also somebody who's very jet lagged, but doing far better than me. So I will start on the law, yeah? International law. I'll be a segue from you. If you really think about how international law formed, it wasn't when white people were killing like black and indigenous people, yeah? That time we didn't really have international law because nobody really cared about white people dispossessing, enslaving, and so forth. All the atrocities that have been happening for centuries didn't really matter. We built an international legal system called the UN because white people started killing white people, right? Fundamentally, I think we really need to understand that. So the UN as a system is really a way for Western imperialist power to continue to manage and regulate international order legitimately by building a system of international law. And even though international law was developed with the global south being in the room, ultimately power resides in Western powers, right? Because if you really think about it, exactly how has the UN ever held any Western power accountable to anything? And especially because when it comes to the enforcement of international law, there is no global police. Everything relies on the US actually being the enforcer in one way or the other. And I'll explain this a little bit more. So I trained as an international human rights lawyer. And when I was a student, much like yourselves back in the day, I wasn't taught to question anything. In fact, I thought I was doing a very noble job of learning about human rights. It's only later in my career, and I have to thank, moving into the climate space, I work in feminist climate justice, is when I truly got to understand the Western hegemony around the interpretation of international law, particularly human rights. And the way human rights works is you'll see that the barbarians are always black-colored and indigenous, and the saviors, the barbarians and the victims are always black-colored and indigenous, and the saviors are always white. And this will and maybe then I'll just go to how the UN works, right? So, and Powell, and I think you also said this, right? International law has failed Palestine. It really has. Because you have seen time and time that the US has vetoed the ceasefire until very recently. And the way it's also about dismantling NATO, but we have to look at the Security Council, right? Anything that is enforceable in the UN needs to come from the Security Council, and one veto power means that nothing can be done. And we have seen this time and time again, right? Especially when you look at Palestine. And so even the ICJ, so when the ICJ orders came out, right, the only way the ICJ orders could have been followed was one, if Israel had complied with the orders. And sure enough, ICJ didn't go so far as saying a ceasefire, but it did say to stop the aerial bombardment and to stop the killing of Gazans and to prevent the further attempt of plausible genocide and whatever the legality was around that. But Israel did not comply because basically the US said this is rubbish. South African, this is just a meritless case. And then Germany stood up and harped the same songs. Again, you look at the people, right? You look at the states that are standing behind Israel. It is Western imperial powers, right? Providing legal cover, providing financial support, providing arms, right? In a legitimate way under the international legal system, right? So Israel simply ignored the ICJ's orders. In fact, the next day they went after UNRWA, the UN refugee agency, and by claiming that their staff were terrorists and so forth with no evidence. But this is what they do, right? This is what they do, and they get away with it. And so ultimately, it really comes down to US imperialism, pretty much not just governing the UN and manipulating the UN, but also the IMF, the World Bank, even our international financial systems, right? So basically what Western powers did in the post-colonial era is, surely, most of us are now sovereign states, but not economically. And the region where I come from, most of our territories are still colonized, right? We split between the British, the French, and the Americans. And they still have this control through the systems and institutions that they have put in place to reinforce their power. Because if you look at it, and this is what's really frustrating and enraging about international law, it is still the only system that we have, an imperfect and flawed system, that is still used to seek redress and remedy and access to justice, because we have nothing else apart from international human rights. And there's so many international law, right, when it comes to what is happening in Palestine. Israel has completely violated international human rights, international humanitarian law, Geneva Conventions, Hague regulations, and God knows how many others, right? And not just since the 7th of October, over decades and decades. When you look at how much information there is, even within the UN legal system on Palestine, it is mind-boggling. You know, UN has come up over decades on everything. And in fact, you know, to speak for my former office, UN Human Rights Office, really in favor of Palestinian statehood, calling out the annexation of Palestinian land through the illegal settlements as being illegal, and so forth. So they have, you know, the forcible transfer and displacement of people. All of these things have come, but to what enforcement? And that is ultimately the problem with international law. It can only go so far because the powers that be still control how any of these orders can be enforced. And so this is where international law is failing us, right? But that doesn't mean we give up. We still have to use it. And it's interesting, right? Because Palestine is not a nuclear state. It's literally fighting Israel as the occupier, which is, you know, an advanced military nuclear state. And Palestine has no air force, no navy, no nuclear. In fact, Palestine has every right to resist. They are living under occupation. And this is what really gets to me, right? All you hear about Israel's right to self-defense, particularly in the early days, now that we've crossed 30,000 people, the moral compass is shifting, even in some global north countries, right? But it took 30,000 to die before that happened. But, you know, that moral compass shifting to what is actually happening on the ground is completely disproportionate. And a few weeks ago, I was in a Palestinian event and we managed to stream through a young man who was in Palestine. And he said, you know what, I really, really appreciate and value all of you in your millions, you know, protesting in the streets. But the reality is I see people dying around me every single day. And that is the disconnect, right? That is the big, big disconnect. Like we can all, like, you know, lawyers shove our heads deep inside the legalities of the UN international law system and so forth. And thankfully, the national courts are now stepping up. And so we're stopping, you know, arms being supplied to Israel. But it does really feel like there's not a lot, right, in comparison. And sorry, I had lost my train of thought. So the right to self-defense, right? I reckon the only country who has the right to self-defense is Palestine. But nobody's talking about it, right? Nobody's talking about the law of occupation. Nobody's talking about the fact that Israel has to provide humanitarian aid as an occupier. And there are laws around the obligations of Israel as an occupying state and as the occupied population, what resistance actually means in legal terms: the right to self-determination, the right to resistance. Palestinians have a right, but instead they've been called terrorists, right? And I'm not saying I'm condoning Hamas's actions, but if I had to go back in time, I'm pretty sure my ancestors in India, while they were fighting off the British colonialists, were also called terrorists. And so what does it take against an occupying force like Israel that has the full support of Western allies for things to change, right? So we can define resistance how we want, but in Palestinian solidarity, this is why I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's inspiring discourse, because we really need to defend the right of the nations, the sovereign nations, to defend themselves like we here in South America and Latin America, we we have to fight every day to our sovereignty, because here we were colonized too. So if we didn't recognize ourselves in the struggle of these people, like the Palestinians, like all the oppressed people in the world, when we are in solidarity with them, we are saying about our own struggle too. It's a struggle from liberty, for independence. Our struggle against the imperialism. It's a international struggle. So thank you so much. Well, our last but not least, guest from here. It's a pleasure to be with you here, teacher. I will give you the floor. Tiago Amparo.
It's funny to speak in English in my own country, but I will try for the benefit of my colleagues. No worries. Well, you still have time until the end of the day to learn Portuguese. So thank you very much for the invitation, and I think that as an international lawyer, I struggle with all the things that you're mentioning about the lack of enforcement in international law, and to say the least. And I think I will develop it a bit more on that following your statements, because I think it's important to understand. And I think that for the Brazilian in the audience, probably you know a term that is very common from a Black feminist in Brazil called Lélia Gonzalez. She used to call racism by denial. That it's the kind of racism that exists in Brazil. And I call this term because what we are seeing now in the case of Palestine is also apartheid and genocide by denial. And what Lélia Gonzalez meant back then was, in the 80s, was basically to say that we are doing two things. One, we are denying that we are doing such horrible things, but at the same time doing it consistently. So that's we are seeing here. So we are seeing international law being used in various ways to basically serve as a facet of legality to actually allow the continuation of apartheid and genocide to happen on the daily basis. So that's why I call it, as you say, that also the case of Palestine is a case of apartheid and genocide by denial. And I think that international law plays this double-edged role as a double-edged sword in a way that, in one way, it allows us to frame the horrible situations, as was described by my colleagues, as injustice and illegalities, but at the same time, Israel has managed West has managed to find, even without basis, exceptions and justifications that look like legal in its facet, but actually they are purely illegal. And I can give several examples of that. Of course, there are a lot of there are no lawyers or few lawyers in the room, so I will not bother you with the legalities of the things. But I think that there are some examples that I think it's very telling, very illustrative of the ways in which Israel has used international law and the West has used international law to do this double role of allowing apartheid to happen, but at the same time saying that it's not doing such a thing. So one example is what you mentioned about self-defense. Because when we're talking about self-defense, it looks legal in the facet, in the way that, well, states have the right to defend against armed attack. But on the other hand, when you look more closely to self-defense, you have things like proportionality, you have things like protection of civilians, you have things like that when the UN Security Council decides something or at least puts on the table certain issue, you don't have the right to self-defense anymore. And this is not some conspiracy against Israel, it's just literally what the UN Charter says. So basically has used as this self-defense argument to say, basically frame a right of self or right to revenge in a way that endless revenge, especially against civilians in Palestine. And also another example that you also mentioned is the idea of occupation. And my first colleague was talking about the role of technology. So it's interesting that how Israel has allowed to happen a new quote unquote, a new kind of occupation in Gaza, in through technological means of control. So it says that, look, we are not occupying anymore because it's not military occupation. It is right now, but that was the argument before. It's different from the West Bank. But on the other hand, we are using various ways, including technology, as a ways of control. So again, remembering the apartheid and genocide by denial, we can say that it's occupying, but at the same time, it's saying no, it's not occupying in a military way. So it's always playing this double role of saying that it's doing one thing, but actually it's doing the opposite. And also, in terms of occupation, as you mentioned, there is a right of resistance. There's obligations by the occupier through of not, first of all, not killing its own population that is being occupied, let alone caring for the basic human rights for the people under occupation. In this case, illegal occupation. Also, occupation is temporary. It's not something that we are seeing now. It's a permanent stage of illegality as such. And one way that we can try to see international law playing a role here, and I think the case of South Africa against Israel or the case of Nicaragua against Germany, I think that those are examples of trying to use international law internalizing those tensions between South and West, global South and global North, or between poor and the rich countries, between colonizing powers and colonized. So I think that what we are seeing now is this internalization of the tensions within the legal system. So the metaphor that you were referring to, which is by Macau Mutua, this metaphor of the saviors, savages, and victims, it's really how the international law was used to be played in a way that, look, tribunals are to convict global South countries, to convict the barbarians out there. You mentioned the origin of the international law. The very origin of international law was basically as a European colonial project, to allow the European colonial project and to allow the differentiation between those who are barbarians, according to the Europeans, and those who are the civilized. So the metaphor between civilized and uncivilized is at the core of international law. And I think that's what it's seeing here. So for instance, look at the argument of Germany in the case brought up by Nicaragua, saying that, look, you are contributing to international crimes such as genocide, war crimes, and so on, by giving weapons to Israel. The argument of Germany is saying, look, I don't know why you are suing me in a way, because you don't have anything to do with that. But on the other hand, international law, anyone like Nicaragua or South Africa can say that, look, other countries violating basic norms of international law, such as norms against genocide. So I think that what we are seeing now is this internalization of the tensions within the legal system, even with the difficulties of not having the enforcement of those rules in international law. I think also another thing that we are seeing now is this innocence, what in the critical race theory we call the white innocence, in the way that you can show all the evidence. You can say that more than 30,000 people were killed, most of them children and women. You can say that they are basically using high-tech weaponry to just massacre civilians. But the argument is to say, look, we are doing that in a legal way. That's the other argument that Israel is using. As someone saying, basically, as if this was saying that it's innocence by default, so that's what we call as the white innocence rhetoric, in the way that, look, we cannot be charged with the same crimes that we are used to be charging other people, other countries, or the other peoples, or colored peoples, and so on. So I think that what we are seeing now is the trying to dismantle the very idea of this innocence, and trying to that's why, for instance, international institutions such as the Refugee Agency, United Nations itself, and other institutions are in the communication institutions like Al Jazeera and so on. They are in the target because they are the ones who showing, look, you are not innocent at all, and this white innocence is interesting as something that we need to tackle. And for instance, in the case of the genocide argument, it's interesting to see the words of Israel state, because when you look at how you prove a genocide, one of the main difficulties of genocide is because of the requirement of intent. You need to show intent, and how to prove an intent of destroying a certain group. You can either prove that by the words of the officials of that country saying that they want to destroy that people, or you can you see the consistent practice of destroying that group. And you see that both in the case of Israel, but at the same time, they often say that, look, we are innocent, we don't have that intent, so we have maybe some casualties, civilian casualties, but it doesn't amount to the charge of genocide. As someone saying, look, don't charge white people as genocide. So I think that's the white innocence argument is interesting, also being played out here. And finally, one of the important things that we mentioned before here, it was mentioned before, the Petro's policy, Colombia's policy in relation to Israel. One of the important things that we have to see is it's a key role for Global South countries to both support these endeavors, like the South African and Nicaragua's endeavors in international law, because I think that's the one way to internalize the tensions within the legal system, and also it's the job of the Global South countries to cancel any economic and military ties with Israel, because this also, at least in part, would undermine this arrogance of this innocence of being advanced and being developed and being global country, and I think the Global South has a role to play in that way. Well, I'll stop it here, and then I'll look for the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Unfortunately, the time is it's not long enough. I think that we have very nice presentations here. And I have to say that here in Brazil, we have a lot of protests in solidarity to Palestine and against the Zionism. And here we used to say that it's enough of massacre because the military forces are in our favela with the guns that Israel is selling to Brazil. So this is like the fight against the racism, against the violence, against the black youth in our favelas, in our cities. It's like connected to the fight against the imperialism here and in Palestine too, against the attacks of Israel. Well, we now can give the floor to the audience if anyone wants to ask some question or give any comments. You can came here, okay? Came here to speak in the microphone. It's better.
First of all, thank you very much for coming to here in Unicamp. It's an honor to hear you and learn more about the struggle of the Palestinian people and international law. And I would like to ask a very delicate question. Sorry, I'm a little bit nervous because my English is a little bit. Sorry, I will formulate the question. I recently reading the news. I'm seeing how anti-Semitism and accusations of anti-Semitism are being instrumentalized by the state of Israel and by Zionists around the world, by the United States and by Germany, especially, I think. And how in countries like United States and Germany, a discussion like this in a university will be almost impossible, I think, in an official manner, in an official organized event. But I would like to formulate more, to say another thing. Sorry, I'm very nervous. I'd like to see. How the victimization of a thesis that that Europe is suffering a new wave of anti-Semitism nowadays because of the attacks because of the Palestinian attacks. How this can be used as a convenient speech for the Israeli government, even being a real thing, a real phenomenon. And it's very sad that these things are happening. This kind of behavior is unacceptable. This anti-Semitic attacks that are happening, but how this is being used is being instrumentalized by Israel to, how can I say, desviar a atenção? Shifting the attention from the real problem, that's the genocide that's taking place in Gaza and being perpetrated by Israel, and how this is convenient to the Israelis and Zionists for their victimization. Because I thinking more about history as a history student, I can't imagine people nowadays, how can I say, saying that the Boers in South Africa were the real victims, or the Germans that were killed in Second World War were the real victims, or things like this. I'm not saying that these innocent people, these innocent civilians who were killed in the Hamas attack are not victims, but I think that this is being used as a form of shifting the attention from the real genocide that's happening now. I would like to hear of you. Thank you very much, and sorry for my... Oh, yes, sorry. Thank you very much.
Anyone? Is that okay?
So I would like to make a comment and ask a question as well. I don't know how much you know about our country's history. We were colonized by the Portuguese, and our independence came from the son of the Portuguese emperor. We were the only empire in the whole continent. So when we became a republic, our first president was the best friend of the last emperor. Our independence and our rights, our democracy, never came thanks to the fight of the people. We were never given that right. So when we became a dictatorship again and again, we resorted to terrorism. My father was called a terrorist. My father was arrested as a terrorist. He came from a region that even after the dictatorship, he still tells me there was never a day where he walked through the streets and he didn't see a dead body. And so when we see the struggle from other colonized countries, who even still after having their independence, after becoming republics, they still suffer from that. Our dictatorship didn't end, still after all we did, didn't end mainly, it was an important part, our fight, our struggle, but it ended because it was simply not economically viable to stay as a dictatorship. And so it is hard not to feel powerless seeing everything happen. to see, even through all the fight, all the solidarity all around the world, we still can't end it through just that. And honestly, it's hard not to see some people call out the terrorism, and I can't judge it. My father was a terrorist. My father shot people. What can I say against that? And it wasn't part of the struggle. If he hadn't done that, maybe we would still be a dictatorship. So I would like to ask a question to know, what do you do to not feel so powerless through all this struggle?
Hello. I would like to ask you, since Paul said Palestine is now the vanguard for the fight for human rights, and I would like to ask you, for the panel, how you see this conflict evolving in a way that really frees people, and which kind of strategies do you think has been used in other conflicts, and how, like I know that it's like fantasy pretending how things would roll, but I would like to hear how you think that, how you would like build a strategy or a tactic to reach that goal. Because like since it's a festival of ideas, I would like to see that. And I think in Brazil it's easy to to be empathic to the struggle, because we are in struggle here too. So I would like to thank you all for your words.
Good morning. No, afternoon. Well, when you asked about who's law student, I didn't raise my hand because I'm not a law student. I'm actually a non-practicing lawyer. Proudly non-practicing. Proudly non-practicing. Let's make it sure. Just a small correction, I can avoid it. There has been a very brief time of Mexican empire after the Mexican independence. Just I've been researching for this question of Palestine since the beginning. Well, since before the beginning of this war, not the war, because this is just one war. And at the very beginning, I remember not Bernie. What's the name from Great Britain?
Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah, Jeremy Corbyn. He tweeted, "You are not alone." At that very moment, I thought, they are. And they still are. All the movements around the world haven't changed the real situation in Palestine. They're going from rubbish to another rubbish. That's the truth. And I can see any change on it. I want to know what can we still do? I mean, you said about Petro, he finally did something that might count, but the rest of the world, not so far. And about the UN, you talked about that, and I mean, I'm questioning people about that for so long. The UN actually was created to maintain the status quo. And it still is. The status quo didn't change that much. People say, oh, but the independence movements. What independence movements? To give countries more markets, new markets to corporations. That's the independence movement. The Commonwealth, which is exactly the a follow-up to the British Empire. Maybe it's changed a little now, but okay. So it's just to keep the status quo. And I like very much what you said about that. I think we need to go deeper on this subject.
Tem mais duas, três. Então vamos fechar mais essas três, quatro. Essas últimas quatro, aí a gente fecha. Ela primeiro.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I want to thank you all for being here. I think it was a pleasure, even though I lost the beginning of it for some issues. But I think it's very important for this matter to be discussed here at this particular moment in history. And my name is Isabel. I'm a former student of Unicamp. Now I don't live it here anymore, so I feel very lucky that I had the chance to be here. But I would like to address something that you mentioned. That's the fact that the international system failed Palestinians. And it's not the first time that international system is failing people around the world, and will probably not be this time. So I think when we think about that, I question myself, so what to expect? Should we expect a failure of this international system and something to replace it? How do we want this system to fail? Because depending on how it fails, we could face something worse in its place. So do we have an alternative? What is the alternative? And I think it's a difficult question. And I did work with UNHCR, for example, in Brazil, in the northern border, and you can see that the perspective of the UN mandates through its different agencies, it's filled with bigotry, and the way that they develop their work, I mean, I think amongst us we can say that we all have a critique on that. But what are the alternatives? I think it's my biggest question at this time, especially because we've seen this going on for 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, 75 years. I would say that the only way, for example, that we could prevent those killings that are still happening if we had done something 76 years ago. We are too late, far too late on that. And just to add a little bit of a comment for what I think you said before me about the usage of the victimization. I'm myself am a Jew, so my grandma flew Germany in 39, and I think you need to go back to the roots of Zionist movement and what they are actually, why they are born for, and it has nothing to do with what happened in the World War II and has nothing to do with trying to protect the Jews. It is not an answer to the prosecution against Jews. In fact, I think they play right now, and this is evident for everyone to see, that they are actually playing a role that it helps to create more hate. And I think that hate is justified. And I feel ashamed of being a Jew. And I think it's something that, of course, in a personal matter, I try to balance that. But I think the first thing that we need to do is fight Zionists. That's the only way that we can have a clear debate on the prosecution against Jews, but we cannot have that as being the most important thing to be discussed right now, because this is just something that is being used to, as you said, to shift the attention and to try to provide arguments for what is going on and for the genocide against the Palestinians. And this is something that the imperialisms, they are used to do. They use this rhetoric and those arguments every time to justify their actions. So I think we need to go to the root of the matter, and we have to fight this discourse and this rhetoric. Thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon. I have a question thinking about reparation. In 2001, we had the Durban Conference, a conference that Israel got out, the United States got out. They were condemning the conference as anti-Semitism, but it was a conference about reparation. And I feel that reparation, it's a gap in international law as well, because Israel was built as a political reparation. But what about the others? For example, what about Namibia and the German colonialism? So I want to think for you to say, I think a little about that, about reparation.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for your presentations. My question was made by Isabel. It's the same, the last part of the title of the panel about the future of international law. I'm a lawyer. My name is Jefferson Nascimento, and this part is specifically important for me, this part. Paul said very interesting how the situation of Palestine is a showcase of the disaster, catastrophic situation right now of the rules-based order. The rules-based order is in ruins, and the situation is very important to look at this. But at the same time, the rule-based order is being upheld by Global South, for example. When we saw, for example, South Africa and ICJ, Nicaragua, for example, in some sense, the disorder was created by Western power, Western countries. But right now, South Africa, for example, Nicaragua, and many other countries for Global South are upholding this system. It's important to fight to uphold the system. Of this system is there's no possible, it's not possible to fix this system. How is what can we do with this system, fix this or create a new one? Thank you.
And the last one.
Well, hello. Thank you very much for the speech. And, it was really, really nice listening to you. I'm Naikari, I'm from the Basque Country, and I feel like very in tune with the image of the conference. With what happened in Guernica in the Basque Country and the bombings and everything, but we've been called terrorists for decades and decades. And I have friends who have been to jail. Everyone has friends who have been to jail for 10 years, 20, 30. That was a common rule. But regarding Palestine, one of my big questions is that, we know that there are many injustices going on in the world, and the media is working on just shutting them down, nothing's going on. That's the general norm. But for me, with the magnitude of the catastrophe that is happening right now, how is it possible that the general public is not really speaking, that it's not making more noise, more reaction, the reaction is not bigger than what is happening right now? Because I find it not balanced at all for what is happening worldwide. And the answer is very, very small for the magnitude that is happening. So I don't know if you have any any reflections or anything about that. Thank you very much.
Well, we have a lot of very nice questions, important questions and comments. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Well, we have a lot of important questions and comments. I will give the floor to our guests in the same order, okay? Can we do that? We have more than 20 minutes, so each one can talk 5, yes, 5 minutes. Yes, 5 minutes, it's okay. So I will tell you.
I'll quickly respond to 2 questions. One is about the how to, change the legal system. In my view, in imperialism and capitalism, legal system is just a manifestation. There is a material base of exploitation and there is whole system behind that. So approach to legal system should be political. What does that mean in practice? That means in practice, build resistance movement to destroy the structure of oppression. That's the only way. The legal system will fall at its own place and it will change. But you cannot change a legal system without changing the material reality, the economy, the political structure, and all that. So political resistance, forming political resistance, is the way to have an alternative legal system, whether inside a country or globally. So that's how I think that the left should be seeing the legal system. Inside countries, we keep on changing little administrative changes within one law, another law, but in totality, the legal system is actually supporting the exploitation, imperialism, and everything. So we can't have a legal system without changing the world order the way it is. It's very oppressive, and I hear every day from my own part of the world, millions and millions of people have lost their lives. And I'm a personal witness to it. In 40 years, I have attended thousands and thousands of funerals. 40 years war, we've never seen in human history. What happened in Afghanistan? They've erased countries to graveyards, like Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, Palestine, name it, many countries. So it's a political battle. That's my response to another question. There was a young man who said that how to not feel powerless. I think that the politics of resistance gives you that strength. If you keep on submitting, you keep on losing hope. You keep on feeling powerless. The power of fighting back comes from within the powerlessness. Nobody can feed it inside you, but one has to fight. It's a question of survival. And it comes from ideology, political ideology also. The inspiration comes from political ideology. Yes, there are ideas, there are ideologies, there are political thoughts which can help us liberate ourselves. So ideology helps a lot. In my own personal experience, that is the way to keep on exploring global resistance movements and connect with people who are into resistance. Resistance is the way forward. That gives you immense power. And I have seen in my own part of the world, the most weaker person in terms of class. They're so weak that they believe, as Lenin said, we have nothing to lose except for chains. They fight back. Women who live in extreme patriarchal societies, like recently, the Baloch women led a march. Thousands and thousands of women who've never stepped out of their house, they came out. Look at the Palestinian people, look at the Vietnamese. They had nothing. And they fought the most ferocious power of the world. So I think that political ideology and organized resistance gives you power. When I do politics for the last 40 years associated with the left, my comrades, those of us who fight in the front line, we know that there is a full organization standing behind us. If we are jailed, we are tortured, they will make a noise. So I am for organized politics. That gives you a lot of strength because there are so many people together with you. It's the lone flight which gives you so weak, which makes you so weak. Because there's no organization, no ideology, you're fighting alone. With these comments, I just towards the end saying that thank you for coming here and listening to us. I was a bit like in Pakistan, we live under so much oppression. When there is a gathering, there are hundreds of people. You can never think of 12 people, 20 people having a collective. So we have like big rallies and big things. But since it's a university, academic space, a lot of students, but good to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think I have very little to add to those beautiful answers. Maybe I'll comment briefly on the question of anti-Semitism. I just want to double down on what the comrade said. There's nothing shameful about being Jewish. What's shameful is that a fascist colonial European project is putting the Star of David on machines that kill children. That's shameful, and that's what they need to be ashamed about. So I agree with that. And I actually no longer live in Berlin. I've left for understandable reasons. But when I did live there, I read this astonishing statistic, which is that Jews account for less than 1% of the German population, but more than 30% of the people who faced consequences for pro-Palestinian activism. In Germany, if you're a good Jew, as in you support genocide in Israel, you're fine. If you're a bad Jew and you oppose genocide in Israel, then you face the full weight of the state. And I've never seen that kind of anti-Semitism within the pro-Palestine movement. And I think people are starting to see that when you call everything Hamas and you call everything anti-Semitism, both lose their meanings. I want to challenge this idea that nothing has changed. Right? If we think about international law as being this incomplete project, I think two very clear ways in which international law as an abstract thing is being asserted is one, Palestinian resistance is trying to assert a norm that occupation will not be tolerated without consequences. Two, the Yemeni resistance, the Ansar Allah movement, is trying to assert a norm that genocide will not be tolerated, that trade will not be allowed as long as genocide continues. Iran has asserted a norm that you will not kill our generals on foreign soil or we will shoot back at you. And that whole operation was remarkable. Apparently they hit the best defended airport, military airport in the whole region without hitting any planes, without targeting anything of value. But I read that they hit the commander's swimming pool. Like, exactly. And Israel backed down. So you have different forces, different political characters, trying to assert certain principles in the international systems, in the international system in ways that are deeply destructive to the Israeli economy. They've lost something like 20, 30, 40% of their GDP since October 7th. That is a massive change. They've lost legitimacy in the international system like they never have before, where even, as you said, in the global north, most people now oppose Israel, and increasingly people question the legitimacy of the state itself. Tremendous change. You have attempts now by the global south to use the institutions that were created within the framework of the United Nations to try to assert international law against attempts by the imperialists to dismantle that entire framework and impose the rules-based international order on an arbitrary system of norms and principles on everyone else. So there's a tremendous change happening. It's not happening fast enough, but liberation never happens quickly. And there was a question about what do you expect to happen next? I think there's a very interesting story, not an obviously clear parallel, but story of the fascist regime in Portugal, the Estado Novo regime, which ruled for decades. The struggle against it was very bloody and went on for a very long time, and was ultimately dismantled not because the people of Portugal rose up, not only because of that, but because the anti-colonial wars in Mozambique and Angola and Cabo Verde and elsewhere ground down the capacity of the Portuguese to wage those conflicts and to sustain their own political system at home, which helped the Portuguese people overthrow their fascist regime. This is a case of the South bringing the revolution to the North. And I think we're seeing the very early stages of that in Palestine now. We don't know what will happen next. But there is a space that's opening internationally for states to begin to articulate a sovereign political project, at least to have options, right? To go to the BRICS Bank and not to the IMF, to go to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and not whatever the West has concocted. And that space is going to gradually sever the arteries of imperial extraction. that have characterized the last 500 years of European colonial imperial domination. So there's a fundamental shift underway, which I think is incredibly hopeful, and Palestine has been a critical catalyst of that shift and continues to be. And so the obligation is to not let this moment be wasted, to not let this moment be forgotten, to not forgive, but to organize, and to not stop organizing, not to lose momentum, in fact, to gain momentum. I think I'll leave it at those questions. The others have been answered.
How much time do I have now? 5 minutes. I still have 5 minutes. No, it's fine. Okay, I'll try and answer as much as I can. So to the question of the Global South leaders are almost as violent as the colonizers. Yes, this is true. Global South leaders are corrupt. They're very violent in many parts of the world. And you can see many of them also support whatever the US does, by extension, whatever Israel is doing, right? And this is the dark reality of post-colonialism in the Global South, because basically post-colonialism actually propped up either elites or dictators. And capitalism has captured so much of our political space, right? Including the corporate capture of our legal, economic, and political systems. All of them are working in tandem to make sure that most of our leaders are just elite businessmen, right? This is where the world's at, which is why we cannot be talking about in silos when we're talking about whether it's legal system, economic systems, the climate change, radical feminist movements, or Palestine. Do not think of these as siloed issues. They're all interconnected. So Global South leadership means that we hold our own leaders to account, yeah? It means that the people movement, the resistance on the ground is critical because we influence who we choose as political leaders, and we challenge corruption and we challenge the violence, right? Which means we have to reform your economic, legal, and political systems to work for justice. And this is the work that, a lot of us in Progressive International are looking at. I mean, this whole festival is about a new international economic order, but it's not just economic order, yeah? That basically is the groundwork for political change as well. To the question of, how do we not feel so powerless? First, being an activist and being at high energy and being radical is not 100% 24/7. It is an extremely frustrating field. We all have to take our breaks, but you never give up. You never give up, you never back down, and you don't disappear from the movement. In fact, start collecting your people, start building a community. This is what I learned from women in Pakistan. And I'm from Fiji, but I work with women in Pakistan. When we started, working with these women in Pakistan, most of these women had never left their village, much less taken a plane or gone anywhere. So they started off with 13 women. And 2 years later, when I met them again, they said, Cav, and I'll never forget this example. She said to me, Cav, we started as one. And then over the years came 2, 3, 4, 5. And now we're what we call a mutti, a fist, and that is power. So no struggle, no resistance has happened because of an individual. It has happened because of a community, an entire population, whether it's the Black movement, whether it's the feminist suffragette movement, whether it's Palestine right now. The challenge for a lot of you, particularly those of you who are very young, is that you are watching the most documented genocide today. But genocides have been happening for centuries. In fact, our history has been deliberately obliterated or obfuscated to serve the Western agenda. Our own people have also done this, right? Your political education is captured. What you learn in law is captured. So question it. Really, really question it. And the reality of any struggle is that it takes generations. Yeah. I think in Ireland, they only legalized divorce like a decade ago. Can you think about this? Look at what's happening around abortion. And this is just women's rights, yeah, the reversal. It took 80, 90 years to get these rights, and then suddenly some Supreme Court decides that we reverse it. So we fight back harder. You don't give up. And especially those of you who are the young generation, you are future leaders. Now is your time. You have the tools to organize and mobilize. Use your TikTok, use your social media, really challenge Murdoch media, really challenge the information that is coming out, really challenge the demonization of everything that's related to China or Russia. Actually look at what the hell America is doing as well, right? Do not fall into what you always see, challenge it. And you need to start doing it by building it, like talk to your families, talk to your friends, talk to your classrooms. Now is the time. Now is really the watershed moment. And so to international law, yes, despite its flaws, there are many wins. There are many, many wins. The ICC, for all its trouble, has issued arrest warrants. Yeah, it is against Netanyahu and I think Yoav. So, and of course, towards Hamas as well. But it has. It has. It's going to take a process. It's going to take a time. But like Powell has said, right? Israel is on trial globally. Okay, no longer can it just walk around being the most democratic nation in the Middle East. It's not. It's not. It is a violent dictatorship run by a psychopath, and the world can see it. And so it's the same with the ICJ, right? Sure, you know, we're still working with the ICJ system, but what it's actually done is actually, you know, this is the third case in the ICJ about Israel. This is not the first one. We know because we're international lawyers, right? Even the case that was filed in 2022 is actually right now being argued, and that is about the occupation. It is about the occupation. So things are happening, things are shifting. It's just that we are not made aware of that information because we basically talk to each other in echo chambers, yeah? Lawyers talk to international lawyers. The activists are only talking to activists. Break the silos. These spaces are so important. We need activists, we need lawyers, we need students, we need politicians. We need to talk to each other about what is happening so we can share information and knowledge and build resistance. True power and resistance comes when we start talking to each other and building our power. And whether that's at a local community level, regionally, or those of us globally in Progressive International. I mean, I come from the Pacific. Do you know how the Pacific governments voted when it came to the ceasefire? They supported the US. Shameful, absolutely shameful. And that's because the Pacific governments are Zionists. They send all their peacekeeping troops to Israel and Sinai for 40 years. They're brainwashed, totally brainwashed. They go on annual pilgrim to Israel. And so my job as a feminist climate activist, and the Pacific is great on climate, but look what they're doing in Palestine. Can we separate the issue? No, we cannot. My job is to go after the Pacific governments. So it is the same for every single one of you. Do not lose hope. Do not give up. Every Palestinian says, do not stop talking about Palestine. So if this is why you're here, you already come a long way. So don't give up.
Well, it's good to speak less because I don't need to answer the questions that's already answered. So about the reparations, someone asked about there's a very good report by probably you came across that already, but there's a good report, a UN report by Tendai Ashumi, who was the former UN special rapporteur on against racism, and she's also a UCLA professor, and she has a very good report on reparations and detailing the history of reparations and what they could look like today. It's a long topic, but also we can learn from the reparations after the Second World War, but also reparations have different meanings. There are people, especially in the United States, that think more individual reparations. Other people think more about structural reparations, historical reparations, or public policies as reparations, or global reparations. There's so many ways of looking at it. So I think that that's one reference that you think about, and I think that's a key issue to think as well. Also to think in the aftermath of this massacre, what reparation should look like. And I think that another way to look at the future of international law, which is also a very difficult question. But I think that one of the main problems of the international law as such, as we have now, is because it's based on the idea of states. And the state is also originally a colonial project. So we need to think more in a more complex way, to think not only about states as being the front runners of international law, but also having different peoples to have the struggles of different peoples as part of those who shape international law. So I think we are seeing now the shift that we are seeing in some countries in the global north is also because of their own populations, and not because of the states officials, but actually because of their own populations rising up and saying that that's enough. So I think that to look at who shapes international law, and should not only be the states, but also should be and think about states, the colonial project, and to think about other ways of making international, like the struggles of people, collective struggles, and so on. And about the issue that we are discussing about anti-Semitism, and I think it's important to bear in mind one word that it's very common from especially the Black movements, is the idea of solidarity. So the idea that we need also Jewish people that are already doing their work in speaking against genocide in Palestine. We need also then to in this struggle, because this struggle is about solidarity, and also it's about breaking up this idea that only those who are against, or anti-Semitic is actually anti-Semitic would support Palestine, which is nonsense. So I think that the solidarity is a key aspect as well. And finally, the question about I just want to say two things quickly. One is my colleague first was saying that about the change of the resistance and the change of the legal system should be political. So I would like to stress that, because of course there are many ways of changing through within the legal system. We have seen the case in the ICJ, ICC, and so on. But I think also we need to always think about the political changes and the changes in the material realities to see a change in the legal system. And finally, someone asked about, or I think more than one person asked about how to not feel powerless. I cannot forget the words of especially older activists, Black activists. I already talked with some Black activists like Sueli Caneiro and others, saying that sometimes when I think, oh, we are tired, nothing's changing, the police is still killing Brazil and so on. And they're like, there is no other alternative but resistance. I mean, there is no other alternative, because if you want to change something, there is no other alternative but resistance. So I think that the way to not feel powerless is to think that the struggle is the only way forward. So I think that, and also other generations already went through this, and other genocides happened, and other struggles happened. And I think the only way forward is to keep resistance and to not feel powerless. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much to our guests, our panelists, and to all of you that came here and watched this very important and great panel. I think that the message, it's clear. We have to organize ourselves. Only by collective organization we will change the things that have to be changed. We have to discuss here, we have to debate, we have to change knowledge and ideas, but at the end, we have to organize and together struggle for our rights, for our liberty, for why not the revolution and another type of society. Well, so we finish here. We are very happy to be part of this moment, of all of this day, and I hope that this moment can give us even more inspiration to continue our struggles. Thank you, Kavita. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Thiago. Thank you all. And we will have the afternoon, other panels. You can see the full schedule in the website or in the Instagram. You can also ask help from the volunteers. Like we have this badge and we have this identification. So anything that you need, you can ask to us, and enjoy the day of the important debates. Thank you. Enjoy Brazil. Enjoy Unicamp, and thank you, Professor. It's very thankful to have you here. Thank you.